Oh, I'm sorry. 1 minute.
The chair, and things like that, kind of point it up there if you want.
1 minute. All right, bye.
Sit it on the chair. You got it. I'll keep it, just in case.
It's the Winfield one.
Yeah, that's the Winfield on its current track.
Should be able to angle a little bit for you.
Good morning.
All right, stand by, everybody. And Rob, whenever you're ready.
Okay, good morning. I'm Rob Gould. I'm the Vice President and Chief Communications Officer for Florida Power and Light. What I'd like to do is take a few minutes to talk to you guys about our preparations for Hurricane Irma. And I can tell you that our preparations began well over a week ago. We have on-staff meteorologists. We had already started watching the approach of Irma, even while Texas and other utilities in the Gulf Coast were dealing with the effects of Harvey. I also want to speak to you about what we are doing at our nuclear facilities. We have 2 nuclear facilities, one at Turkey Point near Homestead, and the other is St. Lucie, just up the road from here. And finally, and most importantly, I want to talk a little bit about what our customers can do and the focus on safety. So first and foremost, I do want to reassure all of our customers, all of our stakeholders, that safety is the most important thing, and that our customers should know that we are ready for Hurricane Irma. This is a massive storm, but we are ready, and I would suggest to you that we are probably more ready than we have been for any other storm in our company's history. We've activated our command center here at Riviera Beach. We have a restoration force of 11,000 strong thus far, and I suspect that will grow as we get closer into the storm's approach. Many of those outside linemen or linemen from other utilities outside the state are linemen, vegetation, tree crews. They will be arriving in the state today, or at least begin arriving, and we will deploy them throughout the territory where we believe the impacts will occur. For us, we want to minimize what we call windshield time. And what that means is get the crews as close to where we believe the greatest impact will occur first. And obviously, in this case, we want to move them as far south toward Miami-Dade and the Tri-County area as possible. We continue to work with other out-of-state utilities, as I said, to secure support from them. We all work together in situations like this. There are times that FPL supports utilities in other states. There are times that they come to our aid, and that's where we find ourselves. Now, what's unique about this storm is the track of the storm, obviously. And we've heard we're not going to have a good fix on the track of the storm until most likely tomorrow or later. And so with that, we do have a situation where utilities up and down the East Coast and across the Gulf Coast are in fact holding their crews to make sure they don't leave themselves exposed to the wrath of Irma. But I want to reassure you that we do have a significant influx, virtually a small army coming in of linemen and tree and vegetation crews that are coming to support us. And all of this is done with the goal of one thing in mind, and that's to restore customers' power, get the lights back on as quickly and as safely as we possibly can. Now, we know that a storm of this magnitude brings with it significant danger, and frankly, every hour counts. And that's why we are saying very clearly that we want our customers to pay heed to the words, to the advice of Governor Scott and local, state, and federal officials who are giving some life-saving information. This is not a storm to be playing around with. This is a very serious storm. Now, we've invested about $3 billion in our electric system, our infrastructure, since the last time we had a hurricane truly roll through here, which was in 2005, a massive hurricane. So over the past 10 years, about $3 billion. It's a much stronger, smarter, resilient electric grid. This includes strengthening main power lines, especially those that serve critical facilities, such as hospitals, 911 centers, fire stations, police stations, and the like. We've placed hundreds of lines underground, and we work year-round to clear vegetation. But I do want to be very clear. Basically, West Palm Beach South, Mother Nature has not done a clearing of vegetation in about a decade. So what we are going to see with this storm is a significant clearing by Mother Nature, especially Miami-Dade, the Tri-County area, and moving up. If you recall Matthew, we saw a lot of that happen from the Treasure Coast north. But again, that has yet to happen, and that causes problems for our electric system with things that are, vegetation that is just flying into our equipment. We've inspected and we've replaced power poles across the entire territory, made them stronger. We've actually taken wood poles and put in concrete poles in their place. We've taken sections of poles, shortened them up to make the wires less apt to drop when you have a tree or a palm fronds or what have you come down on them. And importantly, we've also installed flood monitoring equipment. You will hear us say that we are going to physically take certain substations out of service to prevent flooding from occurring. We have cameras, we have flood monitor alarms that will go off. They will let us know that we are going to have a flooding event. We saw this in St. Augustine last year. By shutting those substations off, taking them to an off position, letting the flood waters come in and then recede, that allows us to be able to restore power much quicker versus having to bring in a major piece of equipment that could be days away from transit. So that is something that we learned from Hurricane Sandy, and there will be situations where customers will lose power because we are taking that proactive step. We've also installed smart meters and smart devices across the grid. That will allow us to know, especially in the back end of the storm when it's typically the most frustrating for our customers, we will know where customers do not have service. So typically in previous storms, we would have had a crew go into a neighborhood, they would have restored customers back to service, at least based on what they thought all of those customers, their current status was. And in this instance, we actually have iPads on our trucks, and the crews will be able to look at their iPads in a certain neighborhood, and they will be able to determine which houses still remain without power, and they will likely not leave that neighborhood before all customers are restored. That is a major change. Now, all that said, this is a hurricane unlike anything we have seen approaching the continental United States. And while we've made these significant investments in the electric system, there is just simply no way to hurricane-proof an electric system. It's just virtually impossible. So, should the storm stay on its current path, many of our customers will experience power outages. And in those cases, there may be situations where we will physically have to rebuild, not restore, the power system. When you're talking about power restoration, restoring power or making repairs, you're often talking hours and days. In this instance, when you're talking a rebuild, you could very easily be talking about weeks, if not longer, to rebuild the entire electric system, if that is what we see happen and Irma's worst fears are realized. But no matter what the damage, you have our commitment that our workforce will be out restoring power 24/7 as long as it's safe to do so. I also want to reassure our customers about our 2 nuclear facilities that I alluded to in the beginning. Our nuclear sites at St. Lucie, just north of here in St. Lucie County, as well as Turkey Point, as I said, down near Homestead. Those 2 structures are among the strongest in America and arguably in the world, the way they are constructed, particularly with the concrete and reinforced steel. They're elevated well above sea level to protect against flooding and storm surge, and we have made improvements post-Japan, post-Fukushima, learning from those lessons to make sure that the plants have been even further strengthened. Right now we're preparing those plants for Irma's arrival, finalizing staffing plans and monitoring the storm very closely. We have what's called storm riders. Storm riders are those folks, a skeleton crew if you will, who will ride out the storm actually at the plant. They have been identified and they're preparing to ride the storm out at their sites. Now, we will safely shut down these nuclear plants with well in advance of hurricane force winds. And we finalize plans for that shutdown, and we'll adjust them as necessary depending on the path of the storm and the track of the storm. Once we shut down our nuclear plants, we keep them offline until it's safe to bring them back online. That includes having to go through inspections and making sure that we work with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and FEMA, making sure that all of those on-site facilities are properly inspected and ready for restart. We also need to make sure that the evacuation routes that are in place for those plants are clear. And that was a situation we had during Andrew. The plant was ready for restart, but there was so much tree and vegetation damage, and it was blocking all of the roads that we simply could not restart the plant because there weren't clear evacuation routes. You also should know that all of our nuclear plants have significant redundancy in them, and that is something that the nuclear industry is very proud of. There's backups for backups for backups. Each site has multiple diesel generators. Those generators literally are the same generators that are used in locomotives, and they will operate should the site lose power. And as point of information, I think this is probably the greatest evidence of the ability of these plants to withstand a storm similar to what we think is coming in, is that during Hurricane Andrew, the eye of the storm, a Category 5 storm, came directly over top Turkey Point. And there was no damage to any of the nuclear components. And then our St. Lucie plant during 2004 with Francis and Jean, it also was in the path of the storm coming over, and it also did not suffer any kind of damage. Finally, let me focus on safety. If you or your family members have a reliance on electricity for medical essential needs, you need to make your backup plans now. If you're putting up shutters or doing any last-minute trimming, be sure to stay clear of the wires at least 10 feet above power lines or below the power lines. If you're using a generator, if you're testing it out even at this point, make sure your generator is way away from your house. Not in the garage, not near windows, away from the house, because carbon monoxide is a killer and it will find its way into the house. And as important after a storm, stay away from power lines. If there's flooding, there may be power lines in the water that you cannot see. If you have any questions, move it away, or move yourself away, I should say. Do not touch the wire. If you see traffic signals, treat them as four-way stops if they're out. And again, treat it as if it is a very, very dangerous situation. The last thing we want to see is any loss of life. Finally, download the FPL mobile app. You can get that on the App Store or on Google Play. That will allow you to get outage information and critical information during the storm. And you should also go to fpl.com/storm for any information. We will continue to keep you all updated. This is an evolving situation, obviously, but make no mistake about it, this storm, as we've all heard, has the potential to eclipse Andrew, and we all know what that did to this area. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Can you talk about the urgency with which you guys will be hitting the streets after this hurricane passes?
Yeah, we will be restoring power where it's safe to do so, even as the storm is hitting us. We have to be very mindful because our bucket trucks can only go up, much like your mast for satellite, can only go up at a certain point. I believe it's 35 miles an hour. If the wind is exceeding 35 miles an hour, they can't fly. They can't do their job safely. But we will be responding. We will not just be sitting back. We will have skeleton crews, if you will, prepared to respond. Again, the key for us is to move our crews as close to the work as possible to minimize any windshield time, as I alluded. So we will be aggressively attacking that. And as the storm moves up, right, you're going to have certain areas, say Miami-Dade, that will see the storm finish sooner rather than the north, for example, of our territory. For FPL, we serve over half the state. We run from the Georgia line all the way down the coast, just north of the Keys, and then come around toward Tampa. And more than 90%, or about 90% of our customers are within 20 miles of the coastline. So it gives you a sense for the exposure that we're going to have here.
And you said you thought there would be, you made the point that there was not only restoration that was going to have to occur, but also, I guess, some replacement of, would you say, the
Rebuild.
grid, or?
Yeah, let me be clear. What we're talking about, if Irma comes on shore and makes a landfall the way we are fearing, we will not be talking just about a restoration, but rather a rebuild of our entire infrastructure. And that, again, could take weeks, if not longer.
I have some people asking on Facebook Live here, do you all turn off power proactively at all?
You may see us turn power off proactively, particularly in situations where we have our flood monitors or cameras that are detecting floodwaters that could rise and then infiltrate, if you will, the substations.
Are there certain areas where people should be more aware of that happening?
There are areas, I mean, certainly if you're closer to the coast, we don't put out the locations of our substations. So that's something that, again, if you are close to the water, you need to be prepared for it. We do our best to communicate when that is happening, but it may be that we simply cannot, time will not allow for us to put that information out. But it's important for our customers now to understand that this will be a situation where they will likely lose power at some point in time.
Where will the staging sites be in South Florida, and will those be set up now or after the storm?
So there's going to be about 22 staging sites total. I will have to get you the exact locations. We have that. We can get that afterwards. But there are several that are in South Florida.
And what percentage of FPL's poles are concrete poles at this point?
Brian, I have to get that exact number. I'll get that number for you, Marcia. I don't have the exact number.
And what kind of winds can those concrete poles withstand?
It depends. The design standards, some run from 145 miles an hour, some are less than that. It just depends. We try to look at the territory, and as you can see, when you look at a map here, closer to the coast, we do go with those higher end poles. We've also, now that's just the distribution network, and just so you understand, when I talk distribution, we're talking about neighborhoods, main highways like Route 1, that type of thing, Federal Highway. But then we have major transmission poles. Think of that as the interstate network. Those we've made some considerable improvements as well to go to less of a wood structure and more of a hardened structure, either concrete or steel.
And taking down the nuclear points, powering those nuclear plants, powering those down, does that affect any availability of power before the storm?
Well, what we do is we have a very robust plan, and we look at that because obviously it's not just the nuclear plants. I was focusing on the nuclear plants because for most people that's their greatest concern, because they just may not understand it. But our natural gas plants, and we have other plants, we do go through a very deliberate process. We look at the load of power that we expect to have to serve, and then we make our plans accordingly. And where we need to potentially adjust power through what we call load control, we have customers who have signed up for a load control program. We may have to exercise that, but again, we will let customers know before we take that action.
Anything you can tell customers about surge protectors or plugging devices into the wall while the storm is ongoing?
Well, first of all, flooding is a major concern for us. So, again, if you have flooding coming into a house or an apartment, what have you, you want to be very careful. I think when in doubt, just don't put those devices in place. Again, the biggest concern for us is in that type of situation is water that is in the apartment or a house, and you can't see, and then you reach down and you touch officials and the state officials, and if they're asked to evacuate, they should be paying attention to that, because the last thing we want to see is loss of life.
And so,
Go ahead.
you were saying that you expect maybe some outages along the time frames like we saw in Francis and Jean, even though the system has been
That's right.
significantly hardened.
That's right, we do. We will have a better feel, and we'll try to put a number out tomorrow, an estimated number of what we expect to see in terms of outages. But again, the investments that we have made, the hardening efforts, I mean, I can say this with certainty, we have arguably one of the strongest grids in America. But no grid is designed to be able to withstand a Category 5 storm that has wind approaching 180, 180, 185 miles an hour. It's just not practical.
Rob, we have a question online. How long does it take to shut down the nuclear plants?
We don't talk about the actual shutdown process. We have a very orderly process for shutting down the nuclear power plants. Part of it is dependent upon the track and the direction of the storm. So we want to make sure that we don't put out either a time or how long it may take. It's just not practical. Just know that we will be shutting down the nuclear plants well in advance of any hurricane force winds approaching.
I have a couple people asking, saying that they're on municipal power and they don't have FPL. Are there overlaps in those grids at all, and do you all work with each other to restore power?
There are overlaps. There are 55 utilities in the state of Florida. In that description of what I said, where we serve from the Georgia line down through the Keys and then back up toward Tampa, there are municipal and co-op utilities in there. Where we can help each other, we do, but candidly, going into this storm, we're focused on FPL customers. They're doing the same thing. They're looking for mutual assistance as well.
And in terms of that mutual assistance, you all have people coming in from across the country, right?
We do. We're looking as far west as the deep in the Midwest. We're looking at Canada. Again, I can't overstate the fact that if we're in a rebuild, this is going to be weeks. And so we're going to be bringing the crews in that we need to get the job done.
We got time for one more question, Rob.
How much did you have to rebuild after the major hurricanes that have hit Florida? Andrew, Wilma, how much of the system had to be rebuilt that time, and how long did it take?
The pictures I've seen were significant rebuild after Andrew. I was not here, and I can't tell you specifically. I do know it was weeks, and some extended into months. There are going to be customers that, candidly, we can't restore power to because there's nothing to restore power to. If a home is destroyed, or if a home is in such condition that it's uninhabitable, it has to be inspected, work has to be done, we simply cannot restore power to them. So you will have a situation after this storm likely where we will be positioned to restore power, but the house or the facility will not be able to accept power.
Okay. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.